How's it going, everybody? We've got one HomePod here for repair today. We're going to see how fast we can knock this one out. Obviously, we're not going to rush through it, but I've got a friend on his way over here soon, so I'd like to try to knock this out before he shows up. So this one comes from Jermaine, and they say it's got no power. And we've got no reason not to trust what people tell us is wrong with their HomePods, but it's always good to double check the symptoms here just in case there's any sort of misunderstanding. So let's plug it into power, and yes indeed, we've got no response and no power draw because I don't have the power cable plugged in. There we go. Alright, so we've got no response, and we've only got 1 watt being pulled at the wall. So that's a pretty low result. Given that, there could be, it's either a short on the logic board or a blown fuse in the power supply. Most likely it's not the more common shorted Schottky barrier diode on the amplifier. If that was the case, I would expect to see at least 3 watts being pulled at the wall, if not more. Now, considering the fact that when we first plug this in, it draws a couple watts before dropping down to 1, I suspect a short on the logic board and not a blown power supply fuse, because again, if the fuse in the power supply was blown, then we wouldn't see pretty much any power being pulled at all, ever, because it'd be a completely open circuit inside. Whereas shorts are pulling power. So I'm expecting to see some sort of short going on in here. But enough rambling. Let's get it apart and find out. And first thing we can do to really quickly test if we're right or not is we'll go ahead and take their logic board out, since that'll be one of the first things we can get to, and then we'll just quickly drop in one of our known good logic boards and see if it powers on after that. If so, then we'll break out the thermal camera, and then we'll take this HomePod all the way apart, and then we will find out where that short is at. Got the top touch cover off without a problem. Making sure I got my T6 in there. All the screws are out for the display, so we can pry that out now. Balls. There we go. Now this is just the display and touch, so we're going to set that to the side. Our logic board is underneath right here. So let's get that out. There's our logic board. Set that to the side, and then let's detach this logic cable from that basket there, so we've got a little more slack to connect our other logic board here without risking ripping that cable. There we go. Now let's see what happens now. Interesting. Still no signs of life. So perhaps we do indeed have a short on the amplifier. And we're just seeing an unusually low power draw from that. So let's continue our teardown. Already got that unstuck. Let's get these out of the way. Oh, this one's coming up like a charm. Love to see it. See if we can't pry that off by hand now. Ugh. Excellent. Get some of that old crud off there, so when we go to put this back on, it's not keeping it from sitting nice and flush. This glue here has no bearing on the HomePod actually creating a seal internally. I think it's more for redundancy, or just making it a huge pain in the ass for us, but we're past that. Let's get the subwoofer out. I'm still going to take my guess here now that it's a shorted diode on the amplifier, despite the abnormally low power draw there. I wouldn't expect to see any power draw or a spike like we saw there, and then it dropped if the fuse in the power supply was blown, because like I said, if the fuse is blown, the circuit's open, there's no flow for power to go through. And the fuse on the power supply is literally the very first thing that the power coming into the HomePod goes through before it goes to anything else on the HomePod inside there. So don't see any reason to suspect that. And those are the three common causes for no power, right? The most common and most often that we repair them for is the shorted diode on the amplifier. The second most common is a short on the logic board, and the third most common is a blown fuse in the power supply. With very special one-off exceptions, that's always been the case for all of the no power HomePod repairs. And I've got a general idea of how much power draw each of those three failure modes tend to have, but sometimes you have some that like to change it up on you a little bit. There we go. Now if we want, we can go ahead and check the power supply. Like I said, usually the only thing that goes wrong in the power supply is the fuse blows open. So we'll just probe that real fast. And our fuse is still good. It still has continuity. So our power supply and our fuse are good there, at least as far as we can tell. So let's get the amplifier out and take a look at the most common culprits, see if that's what's going on here. Alright, our amplifier is out. Despite the dedicated power supply component, the logic board actually gets its power through the amplifier here. So, if there is a fundamental failure on here, then that means the logic board isn't going to get the power it needs to turn on. And if we look at the date code on our diode here, we can see 1746K on that S560 D11 diode there. So based on my experience, seeing that date code on that diode and the wear on it, I'm pretty sure this is where our short is. So let's double check. And no, so our diode actually looks all right. Let me grab another board just to make sure that the resistance reading here is all right. Yep. So that's fine. Let's grab a different power supply here, just for kicks and giggles. See if this powers on with just a different PSU. Alright, what's it gonna do? It's gonna power right on. Did we just not hook this logic board up when we went to try this the first time? Let's try their logic board. See if their logic board is working here. Totally possible I somehow was a little too fast when we were checking our logic board before we broke this down all the way. Doesn't really make a difference. We were gonna tear it down this far regardless, because we want to replace that diode on the amplifier here. We know it fails so often, regardless of whether that's the source of our problem or not. We're going to want to get that replaced before we send it back to them. Okay, so all original parts minus a different power supply, and it's powering on. Okay, so is it their power supply then? That's going to be the first time I've seen one of these power supplies go bad here. That'll be interesting. That'll give me something new to look at. Let's try their original power supply again. And I mean, if they need a new power supply, I'm going to go ahead and do the usual refurbishing on this amplifier. We'll replace the power diode. We'll check it for DC offset and do any replacement of the filter and capacitors if necessary. But we're going to go ahead and probably they need a new power supply here. And I've got so many of these power supplies sitting around. I'm not going to charge them anything extra to replace this. Also, if I can end up fixing their power supply after I have more time with it to diagnose, then that means we've got ourselves another working power supply for another repair. But in the meantime, what we'll do is just verify that their power supply is broken. We'll set it to the side, give them a new power supply. That gets them a new HomePod, or a working HomePod, sooner than later, and that gives me more time to figure out what's wrong with their power supply when I've got the time. Maybe even make a video on it. It's such a odd... I've never seen the power supply fail before. At least not catastrophically. Like, it was like there was this like really large leak from this capacitor here. I think I made a YouTube short upload on that if you want to check it out. Caused a whole bunch of corrosion all over the inside of the HomePod. So okay, we're double checking with their original power supply, their logic board display, amplifier, and all that. And yeah, nothing. That is interesting. They've got a dead power supply. Huh. And the fuse is good too. Interesting. All right. Well, let's mark this power supply so we know what's we know not to use it in another HomePod repair, and then we will perhaps do another live stream or upload in the future if we figure out what's actually wrong with this PSU. Huh. I'm gonna keep saying that. Huh. Huh. Alright. Enough dilly-dallying. Let's get a good power supply back on here. I realize I didn't even take the, this is the bad power supply, so we're going to put the sticky note onto that one. Grab our used good power supply. Double check again that this turns on. And then we're also going to test it for DC offset. So I know I'm kind of jumping all around the place, throwing a bunch of weird technical terms out there, but there is a method to my madness here. Okay. So we know the power supply is bad, but does this amplifier also have any DC offset issues? Let's find out. Okay, so we're going to wake up the amp. Gonna look at our meter here, and we've got an excellent DC measurement here. We've only got about 2 to 3 millivolts of offset being sent to the subwoofer, far below the 10 millivolt perfect score that I call, well below the 50 millivolts target that most audio folks on the internet try to stay under, and far below the 300 millivolts that would cause any sort of damage. So this amplifier seems to be in good working order. The only thing that seems to be wrong is the power supply. But that said, we're going to go ahead and replace the Schottky barrier diode on the amplifier here to hopefully avoid that other oh so common no power issue where that diode loves to short out. It's within that range of suspected bad diodes according to the date code on that diode. Just because it works fine now doesn't mean it won't go just later. So let's get that replaced. We see this diode crap out so often, only when it's got these this date code on it, that we just replace it regardless of what else we may have going on in the HomePod. Got that old diode out of the way, let's put a new one on. There we go. So, with a new power supply and a new Schottky barrier diode on that amplifier there, this HomePod should be ready to rock for many, many more years. Let's get it put back together. let's get that replacement power supply put in. right. Let's see if this bad boy works. Power. Drum roll. Booyah. I'm curious if there's anything obvious on this power supply here. It's strange that it's what was our problem. Let's just double check everything on here works, and then maybe we can spend a few minutes poking around this dead power supply.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
Very good.
I'm having trouble.
And
I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble.
all right, volume buttons look nice and even.
I'm having trouble connecting.
Yeah, get out of here. Just wanted to make sure. So Jermaine's HomePod is all fixed up and ready to go back home. Let's take another look at their power supply here. Let's grab another one here for comparison and just check and see if maybe there's any quick and obvious shorts on here. Nothing obvious. Let me grab my thermal camera and see if we can't find any obvious shorts on here. Let's grab an amplifier so we can power this power supply up. See if we can't notice anything obvious here. Oh, yep. What is that? That's our... I don't know what that is, but it's getting very hot. That might be our culprit there. And what is that exactly? What's on that chip there? DAP013CPHUJ48C? G? We're gonna have to do a little bit of research on that component there, see what it does, and maybe grab one of our parts power supplies here and swap this chip over and see if we get that working again. Unfortunately, I'm about out of time here for today, so keep an eye out for a follow-up video on Jermaine's power supply here. In the meantime, we've went ahead and just replaced their power supply with another one, so they've got a good working HomePod again that we can send back to them while we take our time figuring out what's up with this power supply here. So hope you all enjoyed this live stream repair, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye!